This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 461, Distributions. On today's show, we're talking about the benefits of distributions if they have drawbacks and what the future of distributions looks like with our guests Rajab, Natshah, and Mohammed Razem. We'll also cover Google Analytics reports as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Rajab and Mohammed. Mohammed Razem, who goes by Razem, is the CEO and founder of Vardot, a Drupal agency started in Jordan 13 years ago. Vardot works with clients across the EU, MENA, and US. It now has offices in the US and Jordan, and is also the creator of Varbase, a Drupal distribution initiated in 2012. Even as the CEO, Razem still finds time for coding and exploring new technology. An early riser, he starts his calls at 6 a.m. And when not in front of a laptop, he's running ultra marathons or hitting the trails in San Francisco Bay Area. Wow. Ultra marathons. I cannot imagine the mental stress and physical stress that takes.
I signed up for the SF marathon this weekend, so let's see how that goes.
Is that also an ultra marathon, or is that just a standard marathon?
It's just a standard one. Yeah,
okay.
Just 26 miles.
Just 26 miles only.
minimum. Yeah.
Oh, all right. And also joining us is Rajab, who has over 17 years of software development experience. He excels in leading the technical product life cycles, CI, and releases, and loves open source AI web development, and is dedicated to empowering communities and automating what is automatable. Rajab and Mohammed, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I'm Nick Laffin, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-hosts are Martin Anderson Klutz, Senior Solutions Engineer at Acquia, taking John's seat for the day.
Hello, Internet friends.
I'm so glad you could step in, Martin. It's great to be able to take time off. I'm glad John can enjoy a vacation.
Absolutely well deserved.
And that voice that you hear is our guest host for the next 4 weeks, Josh Miller, Director of Web Development at Urban Institute. Josh is the Director of Web Development at Urban Institute, an organization founded by President Lyndon B. Johnson to provide power through knowledge and address pressing social and economic issues. With over 2 decades of experience, Josh is passionate about open source accessibility and mentorship, having actively contributed to the Drupal community since 2008 and Drupal 6. Outside of work, Josh enjoys spending time with his family and cats, lawn care, and a fellow Lego enthusiast. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Thanks, Nick. Glad to be here.
And now, to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson Klutz, a Senior Solutions Engineer at Acquia and maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted to display Google Analytics charts directly within your Drupal website? There's a module for that. It's called Google Analytics Reports, and it was created in April of 2011 by Raspberry Man, but recent releases are by today's guest, Rajab Natshah. The versions available include 7.x-3.2, 8.x-3.2, and 4.0.0, the last 2 of which support Drupal 10 and 11. It is actively maintained. In fact, recent releases were less than a month ago, and it has security coverage. For documentation, there is a documentation guide for older versions and a README with detailed instructions to get it set up. The module currently has 76 open issues, 9 of which are bugs against the current branch, which is quite good considering it's in use by 4,272 sites, according to Drupal.org. Now, in terms of the way the module works, to get it set up, you first need to set up the API connection in the Google Developers Console and download the client secret JSON. You'll then upload that into the Google Analytics Report API submodule, along with the property ID to enable the connection. Next, you need to install the Charts module and either the Google Charts or HighCharts submodule in order to see graphical reports. You will now have a new Google Analytics Summary in your site's reports menu, and a new Google Analytics Report Summary block and Google Analytics Reports page block as blocks available to be placed where you need them in your site. Now, I haven't had a chance to try the 4.0 version of this module yet, but I have used older versions with a variety of dashboard solutions, including Moderation Dashboard and Homebox. One of the many benefits of using a powerful open source framework like Drupal to build your site is its ability to act as the glass for a variety of other systems. And I think this module is a great demonstration of that. So let's talk about Google Analytics reports.
Sorry, this is a bit of a sidetrack, but I've never heard the term glass used in that term. What do you mean by using Drupal as a glass?
So the idea is Drupal is where people would experience things, where the experience happens in Drupal. But like, as an example, I've heard of sites where Drupal is sort of the experience layer, but maybe they pull in some kind of a third-party commerce system like a Magento or something like that. And so programmatically, there's another system that's, doing the interaction, but it's actually passing through Drupal as sort of the interaction layer.
Interesting. Yeah, so this isn't a module that I've used, but I can definitely see it being helpful, especially if you can especially if it's like a simpler summary, because analytics is pretty intimidating for a lot of clients, especially if they're less technical. But if this has a lot of the data they want, that's a huge value add. I mean, the other side of it is I feel like analytics changes their menus every time I visit the page, even if I just refresh. And so if this kind of programmatically bubbles up, important information, this seems like a good module to have in your toolbox.
I think it also gives you a chance to decouple your permissions model for analytics and lets you use permissions essentially on your Drupal site in order to access some of the kind of higher level analytics. And that can be a really powerful thing, particularly for an organization that maybe wants to be data and evidence based, but not necessarily give everyone access to the full reports.
Yeah, and there are definitely a variety of things that, even from sort of a content governance perspective, are probably better tracked by a tool like Google Analytics than necessarily having to track those in Drupal. So I'm not 100% sure. Maybe Rajab can chime in here about sort of the feasibility of teasing some of these things out as part of this module. But certainly things like, searches that return no results, or searches that didn't receive like a second click, some of those kinds of things you can find in your analytics that you would have to do a lot more work to be able to track those within Drupal. So if it was possible to sort of bubble those up as something that could be easily exposed to your content authors within Drupal, I feel like that there's sort of like a natural fit there in terms of providing useful feedback.
Yes. It will fetch the report data. It's like when you go to Google Analytics, you will be able to fetch all this data inside the Drupal. Then you could build a view or a chart and give it a permission for anybody in the site to see that. So it's act as a little bit of cache. Okay. It's keep caching with a cron, then building all these reports.
Yeah, and I think from our experience with this module is we actually package it with Varbase, our distribution, and we make editors, as soon as they log in, they land on a dashboard that has those charts. Drupal lacks this kind of I like the term glass, right? So it's like you're really looking through the glasses of an editor, and the editor wants to know what's happening to my content that's already live. Instead of going somewhere else and looking at another tab or logging into Google to see that, they just see it inside of their Drupal site, and that adds a little bit of like a user friendliness to Drupal itself.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I think there used to be a module in Drupal that did stuff like that. Not necessarily the third-party integration, but Drupal.org has the dashboard, and I think that was a Drupal 7 module that got pulled out in Drupal 8. And I think there's a small initiative to bring something like that back. But that's the kind of
one of the modules we use at Urban is statistics, or we have in the past, because we like being able to say what's the most interesting publication, what particular publication is getting the most traffic. And we often have to turn that off because it doubles your traffic. If you're on a hosting plan like Pantheon or something like that, if you're tracking your own statistics, you have to track it outside of your caching layer.
Mm-hmm.
And keeping track of that is actually resource intensive. And so if you have statistics turned on your Drupal site, you end up with double the amount of traffic. And hosts like Pantheon count that as two hits for every hit that you get. And so if you could use this module, I don't know if you could, but if you could use this module to power a popular content block on your front page, that's like even more reason to consider maybe you being able to connect to Google Analytics API. And even if it doesn't happen out of the box, sounds like, Rajab, you just said that we could potentially use views to access this cached data that's coming from Google Analytics, which kind of decouples the analytics portion from your site, but you can still use it and render it on the front end, which is really neat.
Yeah.
I think there's actually another module that it's a little bit related to this one, but that's a perfect use case for what you described, Josh, which is count the number of pages based on Google Analytics and use that as a views plugin sort criteria or even a filter criteria. It's called the Google Analytics counter.
Bonus module. Awesome.
You had mentioned the dashboards on Drupal.org. I believe the module that's being used for those is called Homebox, which is actually pretty slick because it actually allows, I think there might be a permission involved, individual users to sort of drag and drop, where things are placed on their own dashboard, potentially add new ones or, remove existing ones. So it makes it very customizable, which is pretty slick. And there is, as far as I know, a Drupal 10 compatible version available, or at least I'm pretty sure there used to be a Drupal 9 one. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Martin. If folks have suggestions for other modules of the week, what's the best way for them to do that?
We're always happy to get nominations for Module of the Week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as ManClue on all of the Drupal platforms.
All right, let's go on to our primary topic. Rajab, maybe we can start this question with you. Can you describe for our listeners that may not be familiar or may not have listened to last week's episode what a distribution is?
We listened to the last one. I think Razem can take this one, really. He's better.
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot, so I probably can take that. So, a distribution is basically Drupal core packaged with a number of additional modules, themes, libraries, configuration, and even sometimes, demo content or starter content. It comes packaged to design and designed to fulfill a specific purpose or industry need. Could be a vertical or it could be, a specific purpose. I'm doing a lot of home improvement projects lately, so I'm using a lot of analogies with houses and buildings. So I can probably try to simplify in simpler terms. Think of a distribution as if you have, a fully furnished house that's ready to move in. You already have everything set in place. You have the furniture, appliances, and even, the decorations are already set. It comes with, predetermined designs and assumptions. So in some cases, it doesn't have to be fully furnished. It could be some kind of like a prefab house. You'd still have to, you have the ability to customize it and assemble it basically, but it still makes predefined, assumptions for you. In contrast, Drupal core is more of like an empty plot with foundations. You have the flexibility and ability to build whatever you want, but you have to start from scratch.
So some of our listeners may have also heard of the term install profile as a way to start building a Drupal website. How is an installed profile different from a distribution?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably sticking to the house analogy, think of an install profile more like a blueprint for building a specific house. So it basically tells you, which rooms to build, where to place them, and what material to use. It's kind of like a set of instructions. I don't want to use the word recipe because it would probably, confuse with the new recipes, but it's kind of like a set of instructions that Drupal follows during the installation process. to enable and determine particular configurations and modules. For example, the standard profile that ships in Drupal core, it comes with basic site structure and enables certain modules for specific configuration. And on the other hand, the distribution is more of like the full package itself. So it's all of the components bundled together, and an install profile is part of that bundle.
Yes. So we can say that a distribution or all distribution includes installation profile, but an installation profile is not cannot include a distribution. So maybe you find a distribution with like 2-3 installation profiles. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way of imagining the hierarchy, let's say.
Yeah, so I think the other thing to keep in mind is like the install profile can like for example, can add additional questions on the install page if you have some settings you want your user to set. The install profile can handle installing modules, but it can't handle requiring those modules. Whereas the distribution can also has those contributed modules packaged with it, or those custom modules packaged with it. Although now with Composer, maybe install profiles can include modules.
If I'm not mistaken, I think you can have the modules become dependent on an install profile.
Yeah,
and I think
absolutely.
Yeah. So an install profile sometimes enables modules in a way that would actually make it required as part of the installation profile. So I think even on Drupal 10.3, there's the ability recently, the ability to uninstall an installation profile, as long as you don't have modules in the profile folder, meaning that you don't have modules in dependent on that profile.
Yep, makes sense.
As people who work with Drupal, we balance this both sides, right? We're talking to end users and stakeholders who want to just understand that their site's working. And we also talk to a lot of developers who want to know how the heck all these dependencies work and how are we upgrading, that kind of thing. So it is really challenging to define the difference between like an install profile and a distribution. So I want to bring it back to the end user or the stakeholder really quick. I have the unenviable task of asking you guys, what does the var-based Drupal distribution do or provide? And I believe there's just a really long laundry list if you go to the Drupal module page.
Oh yeah. It's probably one of the most inflated distributions out there, with potentially 170 plus enabled modules part of it. But yeah, so maybe basically to answer your question, a var base provides a great starter kit for any publicly facing website that uses Bootstrap 5 as a theme. So there's a couple of assumptions here that we can derive. First is publicly facing website, because we've built Varbase in a way that it's for your public content. It has SEO features. It has Google Analytics, for instance, that usually you enable it on a public site, not necessarily on a walled garden website. And the second is that it uses Bootstrap 5. So Bootstrap 5 is not only sometimes on the theme layer. It actually kind of gets integrated in the site building component. So it kind of already makes the assumption that it's going to use Bootstrap 5. So it's a starter kit. It can be used as a starter kit for any site, really, a nonprofit, a university, government site, a corporate marketing site, or anything of that kind. And maybe to add a bit more context on this, I can just shed some light on why we created Varbase. So we always in Vardot, as a Drupal agency, we always work on different projects and different Drupal sites. And we always try not to reinvent the wheel. We always get requirements that just, they come as standard. Every time we build a website, we have to install the same modules, the same packages, and adhere to the same standards. Some standards are very commonly known and accepted by the Drupal community. And sometimes those standards are specific to us. So they're kind of like more opinionated. So we essentially created Varbase and to make our services more streamlined and spend fewer hours working on a project while keeping all those features and above 170 modules that bring a lot of features that are all come from the get-go once you install Varbase. So one example is that, for instance, we would launch a website, and then after, while we're maintaining and supporting our clients, they would ask for certain features that to us, they make 100% sense to be part of any site that we build. Example, like the ability to do redirects from the UI, the ability to maybe, keep track of every single admin configuration or admin change on the backend. So we collected all these requirements and we packaged them back in Varbase. Over time, it has evolved to involve, a vast amount of features and modules. And so.
You mentioned 170 twice, and I feel like there's probably two reactions to that. There's one reaction from people that are maybe developing very specific site that are like, well, that's a lot of modules. That seems like a lot of modules. But for perspective, our own starter kit at Urban, which we do a similar thing where we're trying to keep the same functionality and a consistent backend as well, which if you have multiple sites and they're all using the same kind of distribution, then it's going to start to feel normal for your content producers. The number of modules we have at Urban Institute, it's well over 250. So 170 seems really streamlined. Like you guys, you're kicking it out of the park there. That's amazing. That's a lot of functionality for a very few number of modules.
That's awesome. I would love to see the your selection of modules and compare them with.
It would be fun, wouldn't it?
Maybe bring that 70 difference back in Varbase.
Maybe we can publish those someday. That'd be a fascinating study to see.
That's a long list for Martin.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's actually, Nick, I think that's a really good point because this is an open source starter kit that a Drupal agency has open sourced and is trying to get more than just their clients using. And that's the beauty of open source is that you can put it out there, other people can use it, but also we can learn from it. Like maybe I'm not going to start the next site off of Varbase, but I can look to see how the distribution's built. I can look to see like what modules are they using. I'm sure I'm not the only Drupal developer who's like, tell me again about this admin tracking module that I've never heard of. It's basically ManClue, but on steroids on all these different module recommendations, right? Like we get all these things.
Yes, Josh. I want to elaborate in this. Usually, most of the distribution makers or the one they open there, they are the best assemblers for all these modules. And usually every couple of months, it will come from Razem or from the team. We have to research all the public distributions, try them out, check all these, they are healthy. We check they are healthy or not, used components. So it is part of the things really usually. So for example, the commerce Kickstart, they are the best assemblers for anything commerce. If I want any module commerce, before I use it, I will go for them. Okay, have they been using it? Have they been using it or not? It will be my first line.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating take. I've never actually thought about it that way. So you're looking at other distribution maintainers to see how they're using a particular module in part of your evaluation scheme, which I think can make sense on an individual site. But if you're maintaining a distribution yourself, like distributions have issues that a normal, like a single site install are never going to have, right? When it comes to reusability and upgrade path and all that kind of stuff, there's significant concerns there. So you have different requirements for modules. Also, something that's probably very painful for you guys and probably you too as well, Josh, major version upgrades for Drupal core, because there's always that tail. Like I find that sites that have less than 20 modules can usually update to the next version of Drupal within 2 months. Sites that have more than 40 modules, there's going to be 1 or 2 modules that either you have to take over you have to take over maintaining them yourselves to upgrade them, or find a way to remove them because they just never get upgraded for the next version.
Or somehow patch with Composer so that it thinks that it's actually upgraded and it can actually install it.
Yeah.
That kind of craziness.
Yeah, the lenient endpoint, I think that is. Yeah.
Linear,
So
yes.
yeah. So that's definitely an interesting take. I've never thought of it that way.
I think I have before looked at implementing some kind of a social feature and actually looked at the open social code base to see, if there's a couple of modules that kind of do a similar thing, to be like, well, which one does open social use? Because, I feel like they've got a pretty sharp team over there. Just as a bit of a side note, I mean, can you guys give us an example of maybe 1 or 2 well-known sites that are on Varbase? So if anybody wants to sort of go check out a site that's using some of the awesomeness built into Varbase, what's a good site to check out there?
Sure. So probably one of our largest implementations for Varbase, and those are our clients at Vardot, is the United Nations Refugee Agency, the UNHCR.org. That they're running multiple sites on Varbase, and that's one of the largest implementations basically. Some other clients that are actually, or some other users of Varbase, they're kind of independent users. They're not our clients, but we know that they're using Varbase, are George Washington University. They're running hundreds of sites on Varbase and the Acquia Site Factory. The City of Detroit website is also a Varbase user, and they sometimes collaborate with us and chat with us.
That's fascinating. Before I ask my next question, I was curious too, at Vardot, is every project Varbase, or do you sometimes just use vanilla Drupal, or do you, like, all your clients are on Varbase?
All of our projects that we build, from whether a migration or from the ground up, are all on Varbase. But we have some clients who we just take over their existing websites that were built, so those websites will just remain as is. And sometimes, and we probably can speak into that a little bit, we've built Varbase to be kind of composable, so there are like separate modules that Varbase brings, but you can also install them separately. So whenever we sometimes get a project that was built on vanilla Drupal or maybe some other distribution also, we would enable those like kind of standard features but individual components, like the SEO, Varbase SEO, for instance, the Varbase editorial, and the Varbase security, and so on. Okay.
And what kinds of clients are best suited for Varbase? Because you mentioned commerce, but commerce is one of those features I think that clients either need or they don't, right? It's not like every single project needs that. Like, are there certain verticals that are particularly well suited to use Varbase?
So to clarify, commerce is actually not necessarily the best. Varbase is not the best use for commerce, and that's what Rajab mentioned is like we study the commerce kickstart, and of course you can enable the commerce modules in a Varbase site. But essentially, Varbase, we see it as a perfect use case for nonprofits, for media and news. There's another distribution there, the Thunder one, but it's very kind of like specific for publishing. But we also see Varbase as a very good use case for publishing and media. And I would say, just probably we see it for corporate websites, whether in high tech or manufacturing or any kind of industry almost.
Okay.
So I know there's a lot of discussion in the Drupal community about sort of, a layout builder or paragraphs. Is Varbase opinionated on that, or can it work with either approach?
Both. We do have both.
Great.
Yeah, we actually started with paragraphs back when Layout Builder wasn't still, it wasn't part of Drupal. So we used paragraphs a lot. We had, I think, for instance, the George Washington University, on their documentation site, they still use the paragraphs components to build pages. But as of Varbase with Drupal 9, I forgot to mention Varbase was actually started in Drupal 7. So it was a distribution back when Drupal 7 used to, using all these like Drush make to build distributions back when.
Oh, so much pain. So much pain.
Yeah. And nowadays, we're more, I would say we're more 80% layout builder, 20% paragraphs.
Do paragraph, to follow up on this question, do paragraphs or layout builder lend themselves more to Bootstrap, or does Bootstrap have, because I feel like Bootstrap's almost like an ecosystem, like a theming ecosystem in its kind of its own right. And these theming systems tend to kind of have other modules that work well with it. And I've seen Bootstrap over the years come up in display modes, like Display Suite had a bunch of Bootstrap stuff that you could do. And I'm curious if Layout Builder or Paragraphs has like a display capability that's really, really powerful with Layout Builder or Paragraphs.
Yeah, there's a module for that. There's there's a Layout Builder Bootstrap.
Right.
And I think that it's actually an ecosystem of modules, Layout Builder Bootstrap and Layout Builder or Bootstrap styles. And we're using all these modules to achieve the best Bootstrap functionality. For instance, when you add a Layout Builder page and you want to add a section, we're using the Layout Builder breakpoints. We're using the Layout Build, the Bootstrap breakpoints, the Bootstrap classes, and different set of styling options that Bootstrap brings. So it's definitely on the module side and also on the theme side. But I think we're with the introduction of single directory components, SDC, I think that probably some of these modules would be phased out, at least from Varbase, that we no longer will be relying on them. And it's going to be more on the component side and the theme layer, rather than these Display Suite Bootstrap and Layout Builder Bootstrap and all of these things. So it's a good thing to kind of standardize and get away from these custom implementations that sometimes they do come with technical debt.
How often? I guess that's the question. This question might be for the both of you, but how often do you do that evaluation process, right? Because sometimes you just add new features, sometimes you replace a feature. Like you mentioned, you have Paragraphs and Layout Builder. So when Layout Builder became available, you added it, but you didn't remove the paragraph. And that migration, I would never want to take on because that would be painful anyway. But for like these Bootstrap ones, how often are you looking at trimming the fat, so to speak, and removing something from Varbase just because Core does it better now or there's a better way?
Let me take this one, Razem.
Yeah, go ahead, Rajab. You're the one always bringing those things up.
Yeah. With every release of Bootstrap, the Bootstrap framework, it's like at the last time they released Bootstrap 5.2, then after that they released 5.3. It's a new job, a new component, a new configuration, a new set of classes next to each other, or new HTML emplacements. So these things, if we want to update or move with that, so everything will follow. So let me give an example, like the accordion.
Mm-hmm.
We do have accordion with paragraphs, and we do have accordion with the component system, the single directory component, and we do have accordion with a block, and we want to have accordion with views. Yeah, can you see that?
Yeah.
All of them, they need to use Bootstrap 5.3.3, for example, more like minor or fixed version as well. And they all use the same component. So to do that, you have to do the research. You have to implement, experiment, do number of experimentations, instance sandboxes. Anyone, usually the product owner or the product lead, tell me, okay, go that, we'll go that. Yeah.
So it's Rajab is actually fully dedicated for Varbase. He's not billable, right? He doesn't work on projects. He only works on Varbase full time. So
Okay.
he does this research almost on daily basis. He keeps track of the releases, what's happening, the change logs, and the different changes that keep on happening. And on weekly basis, we have regular meetings where we discuss those things. Sometimes, and it's hard to determine because we have only one person who's fully dedicated for Varbase, so it always comes up to be what do we prioritize first to include or to change. Some changes that users will get like as a tangible change, we sometimes prioritize them. So to answer your question, we do that on weekly basis. We have those conversations based on Rajab's research, and probably with every release we try to take a step to where the community is going.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a lot of dedication. It takes a lot of work to keep something like this running. It's pretty impressive. I mean, and one of the reasons why I think I wanted to have this particular show is that Varbase is there's certainly longer running distributions on Drupal.org, but Varbase is definitely one of the longest running, and it's got a pretty, as you pointed out, it's got a pretty impressive install base. So I was curious to see how kind of the maintenance side of it works, because I know that takes a significant amount of effort, and that's not the most visible thing to your clients, probably. Like you said, sometimes new features are more visible, but keeping it stable, keeping it running, keeping it updatable takes an enormous amount of effort. And so, I was curious about that.
Yeah,
Yes.
kudos to Rajab. He's been working on Varbase since years, more than 10 years now.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
And
Yeah, it's like my child. Yeah. Usually you have to, before I sleep, I have to to check that it's installable, updatable, all these things. Yeah. It has to be like that. And we have the pass with the pass green with the automated testing as well. All these things you should move.
Yeah, these things help, which is the CI cycle and just automated testing that Rajab also has invested in and worked on previously. So these things make maintenance a little bit more. You're relying on automated tests rather than just doing it yourself or manually.
Yes. And by the way, guys, it's like I don't have to do everything manually. We do have other profiles or like distribution, the virtual distribution operator. It is things which is like one click, one command, I'll be installing all these profiles. So I don't have to do that every time. Like, do you understand me? So
think of Rajab as he's like sitting with a bunch of monitors in front of him with like a command control center. With one click, he'd spin up a new distribution, and then with another click, an automated hat test would be running, and then another screen that has build process that's going on, and so on. So that's I think from our perspective, most importantly is having a fully dedicated person or team behind Varbase, and also encouraging our developers internally to always backport things to Varbase and respond, because the ecosystem happens that we're building a distribution. We have a fully dedicated person plus working on it, but at the same time we're able to sustain that because we have other projects running on that distribution, and also those requirements and features, they circle back to Varbase every time we keep on just improving and doing releases.
Okay. And then Rajab, you ultimately review those before they get into Varbase, I imagine. It's like, are you kind of you're the Varbase maintainer, right? So you have final check.
I'll do the final checks before you can see it's like the core committers. A bit of what they do is like the core committers and release team.
Yep.
Yeah, it is something like that.
Awesome.
I really like the release management, all these kinds of things. Review, commit, release.
Yeah.
It's the best.
So I see that the Vardot team also maintains another distribution called Vardoc. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's different? What other use cases it helps to address?
Well, man, how did you find that? That's it's supposed to be buried. Well, it's we created that distribution back in 2014. So we actually started Varbase in 2012 and then Vardoc 2014. And the goal was back then is to establish the use case of installation profile inheritance, where one installation profile would depend on another one, but customize it sometimes. So to clarify, Varbase is more of like a generic starter kit, and then Vardoc was for a specific use case, which is for knowledge hubs or knowledge bases. So if you have a documentation site, a knowledge base, you'd use Vardoc. The problem with that is that Vardoc, in order for that to work, Vardoc uses the I don't know if you know, but there's an infamous issue for the profile inheritance that has probably over than 600 comments, and it will never get to the Drupal core, but it's still there. And we actually use that for Vardoc, but it's no longer, a sustainable way to do things. So our plans is to basically, move out of this and possibly consider recipes that we might be talking about and replace Vardoc with more like recipes. But yeah, that was our way of thinking back then.
For those that may not know, any issue that's over 300 comments in the issue queue starts to paginate. And there's some sort of weird thing that once you have a paginated issue, the amount of engagement and the amount of like actual ability to move forward almost completely drops. And
Yes.
I've never run statistics. I haven't not seen them, but I bet the number of issues that have more than 300 comments so very rarely ever actually get committed to core, because of it's almost it's so long that you can almost not read the whole context in one sitting. Like you're gonna have to break it up,
Well, it's not even that they paginate; it's that Drupal.org can't handle that many comments, and they have to create a new issue. And there's pseudo
They did.
pagination.
They did.
Yeah,
They did.
yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
I'm really glad I don't have to access that issue again, because we used to like update the patch, do something. Really, I'm glad that we don't need to keep using it. Yeah, we should all move to a better, cleaner ways. Like people used to use like sub-profiling or like sub-module sub-profiling, but the logic is not right. The clean, it's like we have to move with this terminology, assemble extra recipes.
Yeah.
And we have to disassemble our old ways and reassemble them in new ways.
I think the output that we want here, to your point, Rajab, is we want like knowledge base on Drupal. Like we want to be able to install it. We want to be able to do like a simple corporate website without having a lot of confusing like interdependencies that you have to worry about. Does my accordion on my homepage use the same minor version component that my accordion on my page where I'm using paragraphs is using? Like, does my homepage and my FAQ page use the same accordion component? Sounds simple. It's not in practice, not even close. And the idea of having a Drupal site that can just kind of out of the box handle that is so powerful. It's so powerful. We've built it. You got Vardoc here. It's been here for years. You've got Varbase, been here for over a decade. All these distributions are all built on this same idea of like, we need this version of Drupal that can do things. And I feel like distributions have always been there, and they're probably going to continue to be there. But I also think recipes are going to be really powerful too. And to your point, Mohammed, that recipes are maybe the future of Vardoc, maybe so. But it's very exciting to see people continue to like push this envelope of like, how do we get, because it's hard to convince somebody that Drupal is something interesting until you can show them it doing the solving the problem that you have.
Yes.
100%. Yeah, it's the first impression, right? So Drupal has to make a lasting first impression for the majority of users. And that first impression is a smooth, installable, demoable product, right? So Drupal core itself is not there, and probably that's also Starshot is going to be something very interesting to see as it evolves and uses the recipes. And I think I'm happy actually we're moving towards that, because it also makes maintenance and it makes us not use that 600 comments patch, right?
Yeah.
So it makes maintenance easier on us.
Yeah, and I just want to call out something, Josh, that you said too, that it might seem surprising to people that maybe manage only one particular site or a couple of sites. Like going back to the accordion example, if you have multiple accordions that have been implemented over the years, multiple different ways on an individual site, you can keep those. It takes effort, but you can keep those in sync, right? And if you work at an organization like you do, Josh, where you have multiple sites, but you're all maintaining them yourself, you can too. It takes more effort. But when you get to the use case of Varbase, where you're maintaining a system that's been around for over a decade, and you're not the only ones using it, keeping those types of things in sync in a way that you're not breaking somebody's system that you're not aware how they're using it exactly is orders of magnitude more difficult, because you don't know what they've done. Right?
So true.
So it's impressive to maintain any kind of system like this for that long. But
yes. I can give you, Nick, an elaboration on that. It's like
sure.
What we call Varbase. It's like the page. I do imagine it like the page on top of Drupal. So we do have Drupal, then Varbase on top of it with all needed modules, themes. And I do imagine all the guys who's the one are building on top of it.
Yep.
Building, I don't know how many projects, sites. So, and when we do any change, I'm not going to take out a pillar. It's like when Drupal add a new features, like they are doing new pillar. Yeah.
Yeah.
If they take a pillar, I do have that reaction myself. They removed the tour module. So what do we have to do? I have to manage an update mechanism to remove the tour module or include it in our new features. So they removed that pillar from Drupal. I have to follow that. So when we work with Varbase, we do the same logic. When I add a pillar and I imagine 100, 200, 1,000, sometimes it will cost up to that. They are using that pillar. So I'm not going to take it right away from them.
Yeah.
I'll do the smooth mechanism, a smooth mechanism to change them to a new pillar.
Yep.
To your point, Rajab, we have there's these columns, right? And you have to kind of trust. There's a little bit of a trust here when you start with a distribution that the typical the foundational pieces of this distribution are going to stick around as long as this project will stick around, theoretically. And I'm just curious if you all have to manage any fears of lock-in or concerns about like how that happens. I think one of the things you're doing right now is managing that a little bit by being open, honest, and talking about it so people know it exists, but they also know it's maintained. Knowing that something's maintained is very important.
100%. That is a valid concern. We hear about, clients ask us, because we do send in our proposals, and when we pitch, our services, we say we're going to be using Varbase. We get that a lot. What about lock-in? I believe the most important thing is, as you mentioned, Josh, is just sticking to open source and assuring clients it's open source, it's going to remain open source, and we have the the ability to support it and move forward with it. But at the same time, sometimes and we get asked like, what if I want to stop using Varbase, but I don't want to rebuild my site? So it's a hard question to answer, but there's essentially a way where, the way we built Varbase is we kind of like built it in a composable component. So in fact, Rajab actually built at the beginning of probably a few years ago, built a way, just like how recipes kind of operate. We built a plugin in the Varbase install profile. We called it the config bit, which basically allows you to kind of install modules, but not make them a dependency, so that you can remove them from the profile, you can uninstall them. And because we're sometimes making suggestions with Varbase, like we suggest this module to be installed, but it's up to you if you want to remove it and uninstall it. And now with Drupal 10.3, with the ability to uninstall a profile, I feel like this becomes a little bit more achievable, or an easier question to answer. It would still need some work to keep your site, but no longer depend on Varbase. That's, I think the Acquia Lightning 2 or 3 years ago, they announced end of life, and they also kind of like provided documentation if you want to keep your site, but you don't want to depend on the Lightning, how, to go through that process and uninstall it.
Yeah, that was actually the Acquia Lightning distribution going down was a fantastic example of open source, because something isn't always going to exist. And the Acquia team committed to spinning it down in a way that was well documented and didn't just last forever. It was time boxed. And I mean, it forced, we had two Drupal Lightning distributions at Urban that had to be undone from a distribution standpoint. And it was not easy, but it was well documented. And it only took, honestly, at the end of the day, it took like a day or two with a little bit of debugging. And I was even able to I used LinkedIn to talk to the Acquia person who was actually doing that. And it was fantastic. They responded. They gave me some technical help. They surely probably shouldn't have, but they did. They just helped out. Like, they unblocked me. And open source is amazing when you can both bring an idea to life and pull it back down again. Like, to me, the whole life cycle is a big part of it.
Yes, the life cycle. Yes, it's important. I would add to what Razem said. To continuously have the best practice all the time, it will take time and effort, really, and to be flexible, to customize everything. I do see really the recipes as a good example to manage or assemble a set of recipes. Make us not looked into a system. So last week we had I think it was another show with the UI Suite. I think with the UI Suite initiative, they are thinking about, okay, let's go for underneath the module system. Now we do have module. We do have components which could be installable, configurable, manageable. Recipes will be runnable. The recipes will be runnable. Could be run manually, or the terminal, or inside a module, or inside a profile, or from the UI. So we do have a smaller part than a module nowadays, called component and called recipes. And we have to move our best practices into them. Then anybody can use these things. All these parts to assemble a module or to assemble an installation.
I think that's one of my dreams that I've been talking about for a while on this show, that we're a ways away, but maybe StarStart will get us closer. For example, and this is part of the UI Suite initiative too, but if I'm building a module, I would love to be able to say, like, hey, my module prefers to use Martin's table component, but then have a way for you to just, when you're using my module, be like, you know what, Martin's table component is great, but we have standardized on the Bootstrap 5 table component. So whenever Nick's table module calls Martin's component, use ours instead, right? And like I said, I think we're moving in that direction. There's a lot of work to do, and obviously I could just copy Martin's table component into my module, and it would be available and it would be there. But part of the long-term goal would be like, if I'm using his component and I trust his component, like I don't want to have to manage updating it beyond saying like checking it or having CI check it or something, right? I don't want to have to be manually copying his code over. Just having a dependency on a component or a component library would be fantastic. But we're a ways away, but I'm very hopeful for that future.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
So it sounds like you want to almost like decorate the dependency, Nick. Is that sort of?
Yeah. Like that's what I think would make Drupal so much more powerful. Just to be able to say like, hey, use it almost like, or even maybe it's like not even a direct dependency. Like it's something like, hey, if it's available, if it's not available, use core. Kind of like the fallback system for themes. If Martin's is available, I prefer that one. Use that one. If it's not, use core. But then you guys can just, when you're putting in your distribution, be like, hey, we don't want to use core or Martin. We've standardized on this other one. Use that one. And it would make contributing components both more valuable and probably more attractive, right? If you can contribute just a component and know that people are going to use it. I can also see it even just like on themes, like if I'm, and you can do some of this with CSS and stuff, but like, for example, pagination, right? Almost nobody styles pagination, right? It almost always uses the fallback. But if it was a component based thing and you could just pass in a couple of CSS variables to style them, and themes could just depend on that component and use it kind of as a central database, like you could build a theme just by picking and choosing components from different people and passing in your own variables. And it would make the, Drupal community is great. One of their biggest downsides right now, though, is the theming scene, right? You kind of have to build your own theme from the ground up, right? And if we can make them a little bit more composable, make them a little bit more configurable, that'll solve a huge issue from the outside looking in of the Drupal community, because every Drupal site looks the same or takes hundreds of hours of effort to make unique. But anyway, that's not what this episode is about.
I don't know. I would argue that, Rajab, there's probably a use case that you've seen for Varbase where you would love to have composable, decorated dependencies that you could like modify in a hierarchical chain of some sort. Like that sounds pretty useful.
Yes, guys. The Drupal core, even the Drupal core should be departed. Like before, we used to have profiles, and all the modules are bulked in, all the themes are bulked in the profile. Then one day it came up, let's depart them out. When we departed them out, maintaining, for example, the blog module or the blog content type, it's only a little bit of changing inside, for example, Varbase blog, and a quick release, micro release. I'm only doing a micro release, not a minor release or a fixed release. I'll do that. If we do that with Drupal, with distributions, with components, I don't want to go down to every file to be composable.
Rajab, going back to the composable and kind of like the decorated dependencies or things like that, I think one recent example that you and I were discussing the other day is your recent recipe for the Varbase AI. So, like for instance, we were thinking that maybe I want to use OpenAI as my AI, backend API, or I want to use a different one, Claude or something like that, right? So within the recipe itself, we were debating or like trying to see how can you add a argument or a parameter to the recipe command to enable or to switch between, you know, you want to use OpenAI or you want to use something else. So that is one recent example that we were probably, you know, we were discussing on how you can, which I believe that recipes will evolve to build something like that, hopefully, and you can choose to your liking what kind of standard do you want. Another example that probably comes into my mind is that Google Analytics. Do you want to use Google Analytics or do you want to use Matomo, you know, for like different analytics? So you can potentially have an analytics recipe and then choose use this or use that.
To switch.
Martin, I think you might have some feedback on this, but what I've seen, there's been a lot of requests for that feature, Mohammed, like being able to pass an argument. I think the answer generally has been to use dependent recipes, that there really isn't going to be a UI for that, or even a CLI for that. Like what you would do is you would have a Claude recipe that depends on your base one, or you would have a OpenAI recipe that depends on the base AI one, and that's how you handle those switching. It's a similar issue with, you know, base storage and fields that I haven't fully explored yet. Like you can't, like if you have like 5 different recipes, that one recipe per content type that you usually use, right? You can't define the base field on every single one. So there's no like clean way to be like, well, only install this base field only if I use one of the 3 that use it. So I think what you end up, one of the things I'm exploring, which will be probably in a couple of months, is just making kind of every base field a recipe by itself, and then just have the recipes that use it depend on it, and then only the ones that you install. But then it's kind of obscene to have a recipe per field.
Yes.
But
Yes.
So
This is Nick. What I'm saying is like we don't want to go down to have every config as one recipe.
Yeah.
We don't want to go
Exactly.
down to that level. We group a couple of configs or changing over another configs and wrap them within a package. This package could be in Drupal.org, which is not allowed for now. We are using Packagist to package recipes. Martin, that day, I think, maybe 2 months ago, he started to switch some of the modules which he maintains to a recipe, adding recipes.yaml. So it's okay. You want to enable the module, enable it. You want to run the recipe, you can run it. And when you see the recipe inside the project browser, you could get, continue, Martin.
Yeah.
I'll maybe just jump in on a couple of things that came up in the last, couple of points of discussion. In terms of what you're talking about, Nick, around sort of, depending on base fields and like the potential complexity of having them, not sort of step on each other's toes in terms of trying to redefine the same base field. There is a config action now available as part of the recipe system that's called, if off the top of my head, something like create if not exists. So you can basically provide it in a way that, if it's already there, it'll just ignore it and move on. But you can also include it so that if you're installing that one first, that it'll get that, and then that sort of solves for some of that complexity.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's a very exciting news, this config action. I think it's really going to be very beneficial.
Yeah, I think config actions in general is going to be an area where we're going to see the recipes able to address a lot of the complexities around managing sort of config in a more granular way, for sure.
Since we're talking about recipes, and we have been for a few minutes, and recipes, I think, solve some of the use cases of distributions, and you maintain a rather large distribution. What do you guys think the future of distributions are with the advent of recipes?
Yeah, I mean, I can probably take that. I think recipes has been really exciting development for us as distribution maintainers. I think we will see distributions and recipes working together. I definitely think, at least from our viewpoint, is that we are endorsing recipes. It's going to take us a little bit of time to rework our existing implementations that were kind of like primarily module based and, you know, installation profile, and we kind of like convert them into recipes as we're maintaining and releasing newer versions. I really think that probably distributions can become more of like a concept that uses recipes, distributions as a concept using recipes. So just like, you know, with Linux, you have Linux, you know, kernel, and then you have multiple distributions that use the kernel and then just package all these things together. Now, I think I might not be 100% correct on this one, but I think the recipes are kind of this component that brings your configuration together, but it doesn't bring everything and bundle everything together, right? You still will need Composer to require, you know, different libraries, whether from Drupal or even something else. So because of that, I see distributions as this packager, and it will kind of encapsulate recipes and modules and things like that.
That sounds accurate to me.
It's always hard to talk about the future of things, right? Because it's, you know, you have to solve for these problems that continue to plague us. So
yeah. Do you think that recipes would be able to like set up a full site from the ground up?
Well, so already there's been movement in core to say, take the sort of different profiles, so minimal, standard, and even the umami profile, and basically turn those into recipes. So I think to some degree the answer is yes, but I'd really be interested to maybe turn the question around and say, has there been exploration about taking something like Varbase and turning that into a recipe?
Yeah, the short answer is not yet. we will probably want to consider something like that, but I think it's, at least from our end, because we've had Varbase since, you know, over a decade now. So there's so much code and components in it. It's going to take us time to move it fully to the recipe-based methodology or architecture. So because of that, it's going to be very interesting to see if any other distributions, newer ones, that are implementing this. My understanding is Starshot is, I think one of their frequently asked questions that is published is that, no, it is not a distribution. It's recipe-based. It's not even an install profile. So I think it's interesting to look at, how Starshot evolves, and we'll definitely keep an eye on that and see. And I think, we should be actually more actively involved in Starshot as Varbase maintainers as well. We probably will have better and clearer answers to that moving forward.
Well, I mean, since you're talking about Starshot, and you just already kind of answered the question that I want to ask, which is, how are you guys getting involved with Starshot? Or perhaps more forward thinking, how would you like to get involved? Like, what kind of solutions would you want to have some say in?
So many.
Yes, so many things. I think Dries recently published the track leads, call for track leads. So we're looking into that and assessing which track we can be part of. And we haven't been involved early enough. But this is one way that we think that, as an organization, that we want to support Starshot in a way, whether through being a track lead or potentially financially supporting it, because we think that it's a good addition to the ecosystem, a good use case that is officially and officiating the distributions. I would say, again, it's not distribution, but it's kind of like a perfect example of what we thought Varbase should have been. We're definitely gonna keep an eye and stay involved.
I have a word on this, actually. We do have Starshot as the chosen final Starshot for our accumulative work, or our accumulative exploration. Mm-hmm. So Starshot is the sum of number of Starshots. So each company is trying to put their best, trying to push their best. Oh, can you add this? Would you like to add this? Is this a better? So I know it will
It's a
accelerate the
yeah.
best practice.
It's also a good validation to us sometimes when we see Starshot making decisions on certain contrib modules and way of doing things.
Yeah.
It's also a good validation, or at least lessons learned that we can, potentially, share with the Starshot team, or at least follow how the Starshot team is doing in certain choice of modules, or even configuration choices like the user roles, for instance, or those kind of things that we have already had in Varbase in the past.
I hope your team will also consider, though, potentially the opposite as a form of contribution. So to the extent that Varbase represents, over a decade of sort of distilling your own sort of, research and opinions around what's the best way to accomplish certain things in Drupal, even contributing, here's what we've sort of found to be a best case in terms of meeting actual customer needs, contributing that to things like the track for an events recipe or a blog recipe. Like, I'm sure there are, best practices built into Varbase around those, and even being able to just sort of share that with the community to say, here's what we found works well, I think would be a valuable contribution.
100%, Martin. Yeah, that's why we were looking at those track leads, and we've already have a good amount of experience for those tracks, and the plan is to definitely share the knowledge.
And I could it was almost palpable when you were answering the question that you're like, almost you felt bad or something about where you guys are on the Starshot helping train. But I honestly think it's still such a new idea, and we're all trying to both be idealistic in involving ourselves in open source, but also build businesses on top of it. So don't be too hard on yourselves. I think this is an evolving thing that's happening with Drupal, and you already have contributed so much with Varbase, making this starter kit that Vardo has created and made completely open source. You guys are developing in the open and solving other people's needs. That's a really big deal. So I just really appreciate you guys and all the work that you've been doing for this.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate
Likewise.
everyone. I appreciate Adam. I appreciate Jim. I appreciate Jacob. I don't want to say them all because I own everyone release module. Everyone, I'll go and read his history or what they are working on. Every component, every package. I go because I want to engage with. I want to see the invested time. And thank you so much for everybody who's fixing and releasing any package we use.
Yeah, we all depend on the community for open source. Well, Rajab and Mohammed, thank you for taking the time to join us. It's been a pleasure chatting with you about Varbase and distributions.
Thank you.
It was great to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
Do you have any questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
And get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest host, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. And you can sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choose Become a Patron.
All right, Rajab, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
My email, rajabn@gmail.com, or my Twitter handle, Rajab_Natshah. And my Drupal user, Rajab-Natshah.
Awesome. And Mohammed, how about you?
Yeah, you can reach me also on Drupal.org. My username is a little bit long. It's Mohammed J. Razem, but the easiest would be also via email. My email is m.razem@vardot.com.
And Josh, how about you?
You all can catch me on Drupal Slack at Josh Miller and on X for Mr. Josh Miller. And I just want to do a quick shout out to everyone working on Starshot projects. Every one of you are amazing.
And Martin, how about you?
Folks can find me on all of the Drupal and social platforms as Manclue, or they can read my musings at manclue.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
See you guys next week.